Hey there, Pirate Crew, and welcome back to another video tutorial. Today, we are going to be working on Captain America. So once again, we're going to be focusing on using transparent, pure pigment colors because they're just fantastic. I really love them. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be washing / glazing a very thin layer of Phthalo Blue Red Shade. Now, Phthalo Blue Red Shade is a cool blue. The reason why it's considered a cool blue is that it takes longer to get around the color wheel to yellow than Phthalo Blue Green Shade, which is considered a warm blue. It's kind of odd talking about a warm or a cool blue because blue is a cool color, right? The idea behind it is that it's relative, right? It's relative to the color itself. And so we need to keep these things in mind when we are creating highlights and shadows for any given color, just like we've been talking about. Just like the previous models as well, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be airbrushing over the glazes that we apply, and then we're going to be glazing the Phthalo Blue Green Shade that we just talked about, which is a warmer color, on top of that. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming back with a second glaze. I just really want to make sure that the color is reaching a certain level of saturation and intensity on the miniature before we move on to highlighting it. Alright, so we have finished up the blue here, just really making sure we're hitting those shadowed areas, and we're gonna take him to get him airbrushed with that second coat of white. And with movie magic, we're back. A little bit of white on top of that previously blue coat, and now we're using Phthalo Blue Green Shade over that. Now, of course, we need to be careful. I would recommend using a push-pull technique, where we're pushing the blue away from those shadowed areas in this case, just so that we maintain those really cool, darker blue shadows, essentially, if you want to think of it that way. And we're really just hitting these white areas so that we're really getting a bump of value as well as a bump of warmth. This is just one of those foolproof ways of getting really awesome highlights and shadows. That's why I've put such an emphasis on it is, I wanted to really focus a little bit on getting stuff painted a little bit more quickly recently for you guys. Just because I know, people like to paint their armies quickly, and it's great seeing these examples on a variety of models. So yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I'm enjoying filming and editing and doing all that stuff. And of course, a lot of times too, this can just act as a good foundation, right? Like, if this is all you want to do for the blue, awesome. If you want to take it a little bit further, like we're going to in the second half of the video, fantastic. It's just meant to give you kind of a launching point, so you can kind of tell for yourself, like, hey, is this what I'm looking for? or not. And if it's not, then it gives you a good place to start from in terms of starting to augment a color, because just because something's really saturated is actually, in my opinion, kind of a good thing, because then we can glaze a variety of things on top of that, or we can start to layer on top of that, and it's not going to hurt us to have that little touch of saturation underneath. It kind of acts as a buffer where maybe you would go too desaturated, or maybe you'd go too bright or too dark. It kind of wants to pull away from each of those things potentially, and it really helps essentially pull you back to blue in this case, right? The same goes for almost any color. Hopefully that makes sense. So speaking of foundations, and a part of the reason why I mentioned it is that I found that this was just a little bit too blue. When I looked at reference images of Cap, I noticed that he wasn't super bright blue. He is in the really old school OG Captain America stuff, like he's super bright blue. But in a lot of the newer stuff, I noticed that it was kind of more of a denim material, or that the material was just faded, and I really like that. I think that it grounds him a little bit more. And I used essentially the same starting point for both Cap and Captain Marvel. And I wanted to leave Captain Marvel a little bit more saturated. She's out in space and kind of doing her thing out there, and just a little bit less grimy. And Cap is, here on Earth fighting, kicking butt, all that stuff. So I thought that it would make more sense to try to mix in a little bit of black and a little bit of white in this case, just to desaturate that phthalo blue green shade, and give us a little bit more of a denim feel. And I think also I ended up adding in just a touch of an orange tone, a pure pigment orange tone, just to really make sure that we're getting that desaturated vibe that I am going for. And you can do it progressively, right? Here, I started off by not adding a ton of it. I just wanted to get a taste of it to see how far it went. I tried it out, and again, so many of these things with painting, I find that it's just like, just try it, just take it a little bit away from what you want, and then try it. If it isn't what you're looking for, add a little bit more. We can always correct, and we can always augment, and it might take a little bit more time, but I find with these single miniature games, it's worth the time. If you're painting an army, you can just spend the time with one guy and get this figured out. Then you have a template for the rest of your army. So, just something to think about. Hopefully this video isn't too noisy either. I've got it's summer, and I've got the aircon and a fan going in the background. Otherwise, the studio would get into probably the 90s or 100-degree range. And this year, unfortunately, last year I suffered through it for you guys, but this year I have 6 little fishes that I need to take care of, so the tank is taking priority. Hope you don't mind. So just coming in here again and doing another layer, I think I added a little bit of white to the desaturated mix, and it's important to go over this a couple of times, just because the color that you get from the transparency, even with the white underneath, it can be a little bit odd when you're trying to layer on top of it. So you really need to make sure that you're going over that highlighted white area with essentially your own highlight that you've mixed. I know that's kind of a weird thing, but if you try this out, you'll understand me entirely. when we airbrush the white on and we glaze the blue over it, that creates like its own highlights, midtones, and shadows. And so if we mix our own color because we want to desaturate it and we have to layer it over, that color's not going to be entirely opaque. And if it's the right consistency, it should have some transparency. And so what that means generally is that we have to go over the previous highlight a couple of times just in order to shift that highlight to the color, the new color that we've mixed value. Another important thing to always remember to do is, like, a lot of times, especially with acrylic paint, especially when you start mixing in like white, black, or any other semi-transparent pigment, is that the color will feel far lighter than it actually is when it dries. And I don't mean like super way, crazy bright, but just, maybe like a half value or a whole value brighter than it actually is. It's important to test it and then apply it until you really get a handle on how it'll look, because it can really change, and then you can be like, oh man, like now I have, it's not gonna hurt anything, but you're just kind of like, oh, I wasted my time. Just want to take a second to, kind of while I'm moving through this process, just to thank all of you guys for, supporting me, remaining Patreons during these trying times. I wish I could be a little bit more active. My dad has kind of needed my help with his business, and so a lot of my attention has been going there. Unfortunately, not leaving a ton of time for myself to paint or for editing. And so I'm going to continue always to put out at least one video a month, but for the time being, the amount that's been produced has been a little bit on the lower end. And so, yeah, I just got to give you guys a shout out. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'm always going to be a part of this community. This is always going to be my love and passion. You guys are going to continue to see me at cons when cons can happen again, and continuing to, work these mini painting jobs. But of course, family needs to come first. As much as it can kind of, I don't want to say suck, but you gotta take care of your family, right? Really liking the direction that he's going, but still not bright enough yet. So we're gonna keep adding rounds of highlights. Using our layering process, just kind of making sure that we're putting the next highlight inside of the area that we previously painted. That way we're speeding our process up as we move along, and we're really kind of adhering to the shape of the whatever the object is that we're painting. In this case, a lot of cylinders, right? Humans are a bunch of cylinders, so never forget your shape language. Always keeping those fundamentals in mind. So anyway, as we come to the end of the process here, I just wanted to talk, about the end of the process. I really loved where it was at, and what I proceeded to do after this, just to explain, is I ended up dark lining it. You guys know how I like to do that. I like to pick out all the little areas where, the blue essentially is not going to remain, and what I found was that I really liked kind of I kind of liked the desaturated blues. I really loved them, but I was looking probably at too much reference of Cap, and I kept looking at the most recent versions of him, kind of post Captain America Civil War, where his suit was very dark, and I kind of like that darker look too. And so what I decided to do was just very, very carefully glaze some Payne's Gray over this blue, just very, very controlled. And that's the result that I ended up with. That's the kind of where I ended up stopping and continuing and working all of the leathers and all of that stuff. So if you guys really did enjoy the way that this looked, or you know, this is the main thing that I filmed for Cap, but if you guys have any questions about how any of the other materials were painted, feel free to reach out, ask me. You know, what I might try to start to do for you guys is, if there's something where you guys are like really wanting to know the process and I can't necessarily film something, I might just try to make like a PDF or something like that. I'm also looking at some other kind of ways to communicate with you. More on that later. Thank you guys all once again for being the best pirate crew around, and we'll see you next time.